The Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
We have before us the minutes from the council meetings of May 9 and June 10, 2019.
Hearing nothing, I'll move to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
We have no matters of special privilege today and no public hearings, so we'll move right on to the reports. The first is a monthly financial statement. Mr. Trivett, anything you'd like to highlight there?
I think the only thing that really is of note is that our sales tax continues to show a pretty significant negative trend year over year. And the reason for that is because we're still dealing with transfers out of the city's received amounts as a result of businesses in the counties paying us wrongly. We're doing our best to correct that, but obviously it's a challenge because those businesses remit directly to the state, so we don't get it until it's too late. So we're dealing with corporate entities that don't understand the difference in jurisdictional boundaries, and hopefully we will get this straightened out and see this come off of our reporting trends.
All luck.
So these businesses are not receiving any sort of bill from any entity?
No, it's the way that sales tax works is you are self-reporting, and then at the end of the year you do a true-up. And of course, since you're working directly with the state, there's no opportunity for the locality to say, this isn't our revenue, or for us to even say, quit submitting it to us. Although our Commissioner of Revenue, I'm told, is trying to do that with the businesses that we've been able to identify, it's still a difficult challenge because their reporting is all done through their corporate owner, and again, it's not exactly a priority.
When that money comes to us, is there a breakdown of what revenue is associated with what business?
There is, but it's fiercely guarded secret in terms of the revenues that are generated by every individual business. The only person on our staff that is, or they're not even on our staff, the only person that's allowed to review that data is the Commissioner of Revenue's office. So the finance director, the city manager, we're not allowed to be privy to that.
And maybe this already takes place, but I can't help but wonder if there wouldn't be some value in providing upfront information at an appropriate trigger point, whether it's a time of application for a business license or some other moment where instructions are given, because this isn't good for any of the localities, because it makes it very difficult to compare year over year what your revenue streams are like.
Right, agreed. And it's further compounded by the fact that they can actually go back 3 years to collect. And so I don't know, and maybe Ms. Dameron does, but what we're paying right now, I don't know that we know whether that represents 3 years of revenue for a particular business or last year's for 3 particular businesses, but it can go back 3 years, so it can actually be a pretty large amount, as it is this month. I think it was $212,000 that was transferred out.
I think it was more like 240.
240.
Mm-hmm. And typically I'll get a transfer receipt that will indicate that it's going back to a certain year, and most of them do go back at least 2 years, if not the entire 3-year period.
Any questions for Mr. Trivett?
Sir.
Okay, monthly departmental operating reports. Anything you'd like to highlight, sir?
No, they've just been submitted. We've talked about the fact that we've changed software. Mr. Maslin has asked us to consider doing a monthly highlight during the operating reports. So beginning in August, we are going to start doing that rotation where a department will sort of talk through what their report shows for that particular month. What we will do is on months that we have a very busy calendar, we may skip that just in the interest of time, so we'll see how that goes.
It may also be something to look at for a work session.
Sure.
As opposed to a council meeting.
Could be.
Any questions? Okay, city manager report.
Yeah, so for the city manager report this time, we wanted to talk to you about parking and just sort of give you an update. So we put together a very quick PowerPoint slides just to remind you of where we started and where we were going. And then Mr. Barham is going to talk about where we are in terms of software implementation. So the most important thing is to remember that our parking study that was done in 2017 that looked at peak demand days found that we don't have a shortage of parking. We have a shortage of turnover. And so all of our strategies have been designed to deal with that lack of turnover. If we were going to make changes to the parking system, we said that they needed to have one goal or outcome, and that was to make the parking experience in the city of Williamsburg positive. We're not there yet, and we recognize that, but we're working toward it every day. I'm going to skip this one. I just put it in here to scare you because I'm sure you remember all the videos we showed you during the parking discussions of Dr. Shoup. So this is Dr. Shoup, but we'll just breeze right past Dr. Shoup. What Dr. Shoup talked about was his philosophy for parking, and it's pretty simple, really. What generates a positive experience, and we think it is Dr. Shoup's plan for having one space open on every block most of the time. And he believes that that's possible because of his years of observing parking trends in major cities. And if major cities can do it, certainly the city of Williamsburg can. So it really just comes down to managing that turnover so that you have that space open most of the time. So knowing that that's our end goal, we came up with basically a phased approach to changing parking in Williamsburg, and it consisted of these phases, 1 through 4. And if you remember, what we told you was that we were optimistic that phase 1 alone would create the turnover that we sought. And really what we're going to talk about today is how have we done in terms of implementing those phase 1 strategies. You can see them better here. And where are we in terms of reporting to you that we were successful or not, and if not, that we need to move on to phase 2 strategies. And so, a little bit about the money. Of course, we told you that this was budgeted because we combined 2 CIP projects, one that was able to be done by Mark's office for little to no cost, and then combined it with an actual parking program to replace hardware to give us the money to do this overall change. And right now we have about $97,000 left in that project account. One of the reasons that there is a balance left that is that high is because we were planning to do sensors in every space of the high demand areas. And that money is intended to do that installation. We're optimistic now, though, that we might be able to do that using the same data collection without the sensors, using better deployed and more frequent scanning of the parking spaces with the license plate readers. And if we can, then maybe that saves us some money, or maybe we redeploy this $97,000 to do more license plate reader vehicles, increasing that frequency of scanning. But we're not quite there yet in terms of making that decision. Now I'll ask Mark to tell you about where we are from a software perspective.
Good afternoon, Mayor Frawley, members of council. As part of the parking project, one of the big pieces of this was the Prince George Street parking garage. If you recall, there was an extremely old, in fact, it was the original system that went into the garage to handle that. This project was going to replace that system in its entirety. So to start, we're going to talk a little bit about where we kind of envisioned us being, talk about where we currently are, as well as issues we've identified and some for the future. So to start, we said we were going to get rid of the gates. No more gates in and out of the garage. We said, to Drew's point, we were going to install sensors. There was going to be a mobile app for establishing and paying for a parking session. We were going to have pay stations to handle folks walking up to the garage, transient type parkers. We're going to have monthly permits for employees who work downtown, something we've always had. We're going to have semester passes as well for college students, for them to park on the 3rd floor and allow them to park overnight. We were going to implement an auto day pass feature, and what this is the ability to drive in and drive out of the garage, and you never visit a pay station. You do not have an account online with the parking system, and you do not have a permit, we send you a bill for that. It's very similar to an Easy Pass. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. And then lastly, the ability to go online and create an account. Everybody here should, I believe we're all familiar with this. You create an account with the parking portal, you add your vehicles to it, you add a credit card on file, you drive in, you drive out. We bill you for the time, you never have to visit the pay station. So that was kind of our big picture goals for the garage. Where we currently are, as you're all aware, there are no gates there. As Drew pointed out, there are no sensors, and there's currently no plans to install sensors. We believe we can do what we need to do without these sensors. There is currently no mobile application to establish and pay for a parking session. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and why that is and where we stand on that here in just a few minutes. The pay stations are up. There's 2 pay stations in the Prince George Garage as there was before, operating in a prepayment mode. We can sell monthly permits. We can sell semester passes online. We've been doing that for quite some time now. And then last couple of items, the auto day pass feature is up and functioning the way we would expect it to. And then you can create your account online, establish that, add your vehicles, add your credit card, drive in and drive out. I'm going to talk a lot more about that here towards the end as to why that's very important. I would like to point out, though, that this feature is something that we're really trying to push. Leading up to the July 4th holiday, we had Leanne Hartman took the initiative to create a flyer, if you will, to hand out to people how to do this type thing. Her and Don Janderup from the police department spent an inordinate amount of their own time after hours handing these out, literally standing at the entrance to the garage to hand these to parkers. So prior to July 4th, we had about 160 online accounts. As of today, we're at about 530, and that is due significantly, and if not all because of the work that Don and Leanne did, so I wanted to point that out. So with every implementation of this type, or anytime you're taking out extremely old equipment and replacing it with newer technology, there are issues, and we have not been immune from those issues by any stretch. The first issue is probably one of the bigger ones. In the middle of our implementation, the company, New Park, was actually acquired by another company, Passport. As we were going through our evaluation process, Passport was actually our second choice to do this project. So there have been what you would expect, the issues that continue to crop up, they still do, with regard to this merger and them trying to merge their companies together to make a single company. I will say that we, or I, speaking for myself, firmly believe that this is going to be in the very best interest of the city moving forward. Passport, their sweet spot in the industry is mobile pay. That's where they cut their teeth. That's where they excel at. They're an industry standard for that. New Park is the industry leader in LPR technology, so we're going to have the benefit of these two moving forward. The LPR technology, it does have some deficiencies in accurately identifying these license plates. These have resulted in a loss of revenue. We fully recognize that. We're working with the vendor both on the software and the hardware side to improve upon this. Kind of an unexpected issue, if you will, is with rental cars. If you rent a car and you drive into the garage and you park and you don't visit the pay station, or if we happen to have the pay stations turned off for a specific reason, you're going to get a bill. In the case of a rental car, the rental car agency is the registered owner of that vehicle, so the rental car agency gets the bill. The problem with that is that the rental car agency then turns around and passes that bill on to the parker, or the person who rented the car, but with a pretty significant convenience fee. So we're trying to mitigate that for our parkers who are driving rental cars in and out of the garage. Probably the biggest issue that we're seeing right now is related to the auto day pass feature and the ability to generate these bills, and the sheer workload that this is putting on the police department to generate these bills, and then the finance staff to have to process the bills, research issues with the bills, take phone calls, call people. That's presenting a significant amount of workload on those two departments. So we're looking at ways to mitigate this. Those might include third-party billing services. It might include additional staff. We're still investigating that. And then last, in terms of issues, standard practice for us has been, back up a little bit, one of our initial big events after the system went live, we had significant lines at the pay stations. People were having to check, and at that point, it was check in and check out at the pay station. So you would have significant lines at these two pay stations. They were brand new. People didn't necessarily know how to use them. So you'd have to check in, go do your thing, you come back, you'd have to check out, resulting in significant lines at these pay stations. So our normal practice has been since July 4th, since when they had scrumptious downtown, was to discontinue the use of the pay stations. Let the LPR take care of everything as far as reading people in and out. If you had a permit, it was still recognize that, and you wouldn't get a bill. If you had your account online, you wouldn't have to do it as well. It would just be for people who would normally visit the pay stations. Again, this practice, while it's great for the parkers, it generates an extraordinary amount of work on the police department and the fire department. So we're trying to come up with ways. Finance department, to mitigate that. So those are our issues. In the future, again, we talked about Passport and the acquisition. We're going to implement this mobile application to allow for parking session initiation and payment, extension of that, all from a mobile app. That's reliant upon the technology since we're using New Park to enforce. Passport has to be able to read New Park data. They tell me they're there, so it's just a matter of implementing that particular application. I would expect that within the next 2 to 3 months to be able to do that. We have to continue to refine and improve upon the accuracy of the LPR system to make sure that it's doing what we need it to do in terms of identification of the plates. And then lastly, kind of just following up, if the goal is to improve turnover and have a positive parking experience, there is no better way to have that positive parking experience than to have your account online, have your vehicle or your vehicles attached to that account, and then have a credit card on file such that we can charge you for that amount of time, and that eliminates the need to create these bills, get these bills in the mail. So hopefully that's a kind of a little bit of insight as to where we were hoping, where we started, where we're at, and the issues that we're trying to resolve currently. So with that, I'll turn it back to Drew, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
One thing that we need to talk about a little bit during the report today, and it's not something that we're ready for council to take action on, obviously, but we want you to be aware of, is that while we think adding the Passport app is an important step to the overall experience, in fact, we think it's critical to the overall experience, the way that Passport operates, and it's one of the reasons that we didn't select Passport as a vendor initially, is they charge a convenience fee for using that app. And in most of their cities that they operate in, they pass that convenience fee on to the parker. And we are bringing that to your attention because while we want the app, we think it's important for those people that park in the garage expecting $1 an hour rate, if they use the app, are going to pay $1.35, right? Now, that 35-cent charge is per parking session. So it's not like it's 35 cents in addition every hour. It's just that one session. So if you stay 2 hours, it's going to be $2.35. But it would be a change in terms of the person that parks there thinking that they're paying the city $1. Their actual bill would be $1.35.
But if people make an account, then
And they don't have that.
Questions?
Yeah, no questions. You know, obviously it has dragged on and it's caused some inconvenience for some folks, but I'm glad to hear that you're on top of it, and New Park or the new company or Passport are working to get this solved, and hopefully sooner than later. I did have the occasion the other day to talk to somebody about it, and they were very complimentary of it. So not everybody's upset.
Sure. I would say that this is, you know, a lot of times I get up here and talk about technological issues. This is not a squarely me doing all this. I have significant support and help and team with the police department, with the finance department, with the city manager's office. It's been something that we're all suffering through equally together. But again, hopefully we're going to be on the right path to get this all corrected.
Appreciate your work on this, Mark, and Paul, sorry to hear about some of the mishaps, but since we're transitioning to a new system, I think we were expecting some of these troubleshooting issues. I'm just glad that we're responsive to those issues. You mentioned that Leanne and Generup helped out with passing out flyers, and I'm aware there's a TV monitor at one part that provides events and maybe not everyone would see it if you put up instructions to register an online account. But in terms of our parking ambassadors, have they been helping out in any way, giving out flyers as well, interacting with frustrated parkers?
Absolutely, and, you know, unfortunately, they're generally the first line that deals with our frustrated parkers. Certainly feel like it's a much better system not having the gate, and so if we think back 6-8 months, definitely much improved, but still working through some of the growing pains. But the parking ambassadors are really the ones out there day in and day out dealing with the issues and helping the citizens so that the experience can be as positive as possible.
My favorite people. Thank you.
One of the things just to add on to that is the delay in us being able to report the success of Phase 1 is due to the fact that the ambassadors are spending more time in the garage helping people than what we want them to. Because in order for us to use the LPR to demonstrate turnover, we've got to be running loops on the downtown parking. And we can't do that if the ambassadors are spending most of their day in the garage. So the whole point here is that we get the garage situated so that we can get back to the business of what we set out to do, which is inspiring that turnover.
Any questions, comments? Just thank you for the effort.
I'd just like to echo the comments about how easy and convenient it is to have the online account. And for anybody locally, it doesn't cost you anything to establish the account. You just have to go in and put in your name, address, telephone number, credit card number, and license plates of the vehicles. And if you ever need to park in the garage, it doesn't get much easier than that. And I know you focused a fair amount on some of the negative aspects of the implementation, but what I don't want to have people go away with is the impression that it is a bad experience now. It is not.
Right.
And I parked in the garage for more than a decade with a monthly pass when I worked downtown. And I can tell you on a regular basis, there were problems with the equipment and people just didn't understand how to use the pay kiosk, or the gates would stick, or they didn't understand they had to pay before they had to exit the garage. They thought they could pay at the exit gate, and at times it could be a real mess. And all that has gone away. And so on the whole, I mean, I'm not dealing with everything that staff is dealing with, but from what I see anecdotally, it seems to be a much better overall situation. So we appreciate the implementation so far, but it's clear we've got work to do. I know you didn't ask for us to give you an opinion here. I'm not a fan of the city picking up the convenience fee on the app. I think we ought to understand the true cost of parking.
Sure.
So that 35 cents per parking session to me makes sense. And if people don't want to pay that, they can just create the account.
Right. We are going to have multiple avenues for you to satisfy the charge, so it would be optional to use the app.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Anything else on city manager? City attorney report.
I have things further in the agenda.
Oh, you're saving them up for us. How nice. Okay, well, that takes us to unfinished business. Do we have any? No? New business. The first is the consideration and approval of Proposed Ordinance 19-13 to amend Section 18-57 and 18-58 of Article 2, Division 1 of Chapter 18 of the Williamsburg City Code to comply with House Bill 1655, enacted during the 2019 session of the Virginia General Assembly, expanding the real property tax exemption for the surviving spouse of a service member and addressing ownership provisions. Ms. Shelton?
So this is a housekeeping matter. Last month, I briefed council on bills from the General Assembly. This was one of them, which expands the exemption for real property for the surviving spouse of a service member killed in action or a veteran who has a 100% service-connected disability to not only the property that the spouse shared with the person who's deceased, but their subsequent real property as well until they get married. And at that point, the exemption would end. So the language in the proposed ordinance adds those provisions to the city code. There is some cleanup that we have done with respect to the unlikely situation that the dwelling on the property is owned by someone other than the property owner, and it basically bifurcates the exemption so it applies only to that portion owned by the disabled veteran or the surviving spouse. And so those are the two changes in the code, and it's staff's recommendation that City Council adopt Proposed Ordinance 19-13.
So it is just a matter of housekeeping, but I think it's one that obviously doesn't create much burden on the city. I think we can do to help honor and show our respect.
Every year, you'll see bills come from the General Assembly trying to benefit veterans or their spouses in some way. Although I will say, getting 100% disability rating is really, really hard. So in terms of how many folks, spouses, surviving spouses are actually benefiting from this program, we don't know, but happy to support this motion.
No comments.
I have a question, if you
No, I
don't.
don't have any questions.
Surviving spouse, married at the time that the service member deceases?
Yes.
And that's made clear in the legislation. It's not somebody who's a former spouse and they're,
It's the person who's married to the individual and owns real property with the individual.
and they had to have been married to that
Yes.
person at the time, okay. And I've said this before, I think all these things, there's no way we can repay the debt that these people, that we owe these folks who've given their lives. But I do wish at some point the General Assembly would give serious consideration to what they can do at the state level to do the same thing, instead of always coming back to the locality. I just think that would be just even more valuable to a lot of folks. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance 19-13.
Second.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Next item is consideration and approval of proposed ordinance 19-14 to amend section 18-381 of Article 10, Division 2 of Chapter 18 to create a separate taxing classification for mobile food units and exemption for new mobile food units as provided by Senate Bill 1425, adopted during the 2019 session of the Virginia General Assembly.
So again, this is another housekeeping matter. We looked at the best way to do this and decided that the best way to handle this would be to add a separate classification for mobile food units for purposes of the B-poll tax. And so we have done that by adding subsection N, which provides for the amount of the B-poll tax as well as the exemption and when the exemption applies. So that is what the proposed ordinance does. And staff's recommendation is City Council adopt ordinance 19-14.
How is the 20 cents per $100 of gross receipts calculated?
It's the retail rate. So that is what food trucks have been paying up to this point, and this just creates a separate classification. So they're still going to see the same amount of tax.
Right, so it's not a new fee, it's
No.
not something that we've not seen before, it's consistent, it's just a separate category.
Because there is an exemption associated with this in terms of when you are looking at the code, this is
Right.
what makes the most sense in putting it in the code. So it only applies to the mobile food units.
Understood. Thanks for your work on this.
As I recall, when we were looking at the food truck ordinance, there was a lot of discussion about the definition of a food truck. Are we consistent in terms of our definition here?
Well, so you're going to see an amendment to the zoning ordinance in September as well, but this is just with the tax, and this is a new definition from the Code of Virginia, so we will make sure that both the zoning ordinance and this definition are consistent.
Thank you. Yeah.
No questions.
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance number 19-14.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Next item is consideration and approval of proposed resolution 19-11, budget amendment for the Public Assistance Fund for fiscal year ending June 30, 2019. Welcome, Ms. Evans.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Resolution 19-11 is a budget amendment for the Public Assistance Fund for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019. The request for the budget amendment is mainly due to the costs associated with the Children's Services Act program. The Children's Services Act program is named after a law enacted in 1993 establishing a state pool of funds to support services for youth. So the code requires cities to annually appropriate funds sufficient to provide these services to these mandated populations, including foster children. So the city budgets for these costs based on the initial allocations determined by the state. And so as of May 2019, the expenditures for these services have exceeded the initial budget of $236,609 by $244,723. So the challenge is trying to predict the number of youth who will be eligible for the services, such as youth moving into the city or children coming into foster care, and then which services will be needed. So because of the difficulty in predicting the cost of the services in a given budget year, the Public Assistance Fund has accumulated a fund balance as a reserve to be used when expenditures exceed the appropriations, such as which occurred in fiscal year 19. So the amount of the reserve is $572,412, and staff are requesting $250,000 of the reserve to be appropriated for the expenditures. It's important for this Public Assistance Fund acting as the reserve for human services to stay funded. So in fiscal year 20, we expect to receive some state and federal assistance along with $112,000 of local funds that exceed the budget for fiscal year 19. So if operating expenses for the department are approximate to fiscal year 19, then some portion of that local assistance could be available to rebuild that reserve. So I'm available for any questions along with Ms. Dameron.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, the budget was $236,609, and the expenses exceeded that by $244,000, so more than twice what we'd anticipated.
Yes.
So do we see, and it could easily be more than that one year, and it could be much less than what we budget in another year?
Yes. So it can fluctuate, year by year, and even, one service is so costly that it can throw off the budget by.
And it's really driven by the needs of the population within the city in that given year?
Yes.
Ms. Evans, we find that this population particularly is inherently transient. So while we may have a child in our jurisdiction this year that requires a great deal of care, that person may move on to another jurisdiction next year, maybe even in another state, that would reduce our expenses. So it's impossible to predict.
Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 19-11 be approved consistent with the staff recommendation.
Second.
Ms. Ramsey, you're this close. Ms. Burcham?
Jeopardy.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
This next item is very exciting. The consideration for authorization to purchase a 2019 sewer flusher from Mid-Atlantic Waste Systems using the Sourcewell contract. Mr. Clayton.
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, I wasn't sure you're a dirty movie, but Drew wouldn't let me. I'm seeking your approval today for purchase of a high-pressure sewer flusher truck from Mid-Atlantic Waste Systems located in Chesapeake, Virginia. Mid-Atlantic is the rep for Sewer Equipment Company of America for the state of Virginia. Since the purchase price is at $245,340, it's above the $100,000 threshold, so council approval is required. We're using the former National Joint Powers Association. Now the name is Sourcewell. We're using their contract with Mid-Atlantic. The city has taken advantage of using this method of purchasing, most recently with the Tyler financial software across the city operations. Sourcewell receives quotes and rates those based on several criteria, obviously price, but also on things like industry success, servicing capabilities, and warranty. We feel very comfortable with the amount of vetting by Sourcewell and the unit meeting our needs. This new unit will replace our 1990 vintage unit, which is unreliable and costly to keep on the road. The sewer flusher is probably our most critical piece of equipment in public works, as it takes care of major sewer stoppages and is used for routine maintenance of keeping our sewers clean. And as you know, some of our sewers are fairly old. I would dare say that every locality that owns a sewer system probably has a unit like this on their property. Money is budgeted for this planned expense in the Vehicle Replacement CIP Fund. And with that, we're recommending that the purchase of the sewer flusher from Mid-Atlantic. Take any questions.
You, Mr. Clayton. I think I see here we had originally budgeted this 2 years ago, and you were able to drive another 2 years out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then that's a positive thing.
We also, it took some time. Yeah, we got through that period. We also took a little bit of time looking at different machines and that kind of thing. So we did spend some time because it's obviously a big purchase, one of our biggest purchases.
Sure. Well, 29 years on the vehicles, certainly.
What's that?
We got 29 years out of this vehicle, so it's
Really
did pretty good.
yeah. So I have no problem with this.
That use is older than I am.
So I've got shoes older than you.
It's perspective right there. Happy to support this. Thank you, Dan.
A couple questions. So lead time, salvage value of the existing one, and can we get any accessories that help us go down Duke of Gloucester Street?
The lead time, I think, is around 6 months with this vehicle, so it'll take a little while to get it. There are, and Duke of Gloucester Street,
Clean up?
we're working on that, so we hope to get that figured out.
What about salvage value for the existing unit?
Yeah, there's some thoughts there. We were about selling it. There's no trade in here, so this would be an outright sell. And somebody will pick it up. It does need a lot of work, but rather than spending a couple $100,000, maybe a small little county would, spend $50,000, $75,000 or whatever to fix it up. But it's on its last leg, so I can guarantee you that. But there's also some thought we could actually convert this unit to something else in the city. So we've talked about a brine machine for snow removal, because it's got a nice big tank on the back. So we've kind of thrown that out there a little bit, but no decisions made there.
Oh, is that because that the reason that we're getting a new one is really equipment?
Yeah,
on it. It's not the vehicle as much, right?
The vehicle's not too bad, but the back unit and everything we've already replaced the pumps a couple times. We've got a pretty good leak back there now, so we're.
Right, the actual truck has low miles because, it stays within the city, obviously. Yeah. The real wear is on the equipment.
Thank you.
No questions, just thank you for your diligence in trying to get the best unit for the best value.
And I do like the idea of repurposing it. I mean, if that's an option.
What's that?
I do like the idea of repurposing the vehicle. If that's an option, and it saves us some money from.
Possibility. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Clayton, do you happen to know how much was budgeted in the CIP for this, and are we in close range?
There's actually $230,000 in the budget, but there's money left over for all the other vehicles that didn't come in as high, so we have plenty of money in the vehicle fund replacement.
Great. Do I hear a motion?
I move that council authorize the city manager to purchase the sewer flusher from Mid-Atlantic Waste Systems using the Sourcewell contract.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Next item is the presentation of the 2019 fiscal year-end financial report. Ms. Dameron.
I'm going to move this time, because last time I think I put on a show I didn't intend to when I put my book
Hate it
there.
when that happens.
Don't show Dan's movie.
Right. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right. Well, good afternoon. And today's agenda included the financial report for June, which is a year-to-date look at where we were at June 30th, and that will be my starting point for this presentation. After June 30th, between July 1st and the 1st of September, we continue to record expenses back to June 30th that relate to the previous fiscal year, and we also accrue revenues that were budgeted to fund that year. So today, I'd like to give my estimate of where, after those accruals are made, what our financial status will be. And I'd like to focus on the general fund, the capital improvement fund, the utility fund, the tourism fund, and then I'll conclude with the financial audit schedule. Now, this slide shows our revenues for the general fund, and as of June 30th, we had $33.4 million in revenue compared to a budget of $34.2 million. So as of June 30th, we had $835,000 variance below the budget for revenues. I do anticipate that between now and September 1st, we will accrue another $1.4 million in revenue. Now, the biggest part of that will come from our meals and our hotel tax, but we'll also accrue some for EMS services recovery, as well as personal property, real estate, and some from some of the other local revenues. At that point, we would expect to have the revenues to exceed budget by $555,000. And on the next slide, I'm just driving home. We're talking estimates here, so I'll try to the extent possible to use round numbers. And this slide shows the significant revenues that should come in over budget by the amount I anticipate them to be over budget. So the largest amount will be from our business and professional license at $358,000. Bank stock, meals, other, and the other I have starred there just to point out that that is a category we use for revenues that are either small enough generally that they don't need their own line item or infrequent. In this year, that amounted to $65,900 over the budget we anticipated. Altogether, we anticipate coming in these items over budget by $830,000. And of course, we'll have some revenues that come in under budget. We anticipate that communication tax will come in under about $114,000. That has been a historic trend now for the past several years. Recordation will come in under about $89,000, and our parking $87,000 under. And then the results, the netting of the revenue over and under the $820,000 or $30,000 over budget, netted against the $290,000 coming under budget, leaves us with $539,000 net over budget. That $15,500 is just a netting of several smaller revenues over and under that net out to $15,500 over budget, and that ties us back into the second slide that I showed this afternoon. We anticipate revenues will end about $555,000 over budget. Looking at expenditures, we ended the year with $33,000 on a cash basis, $33.3 million to a budget of $34.2. So at that point, our expenditures came in under budget $872,000. We do know that we will have some additional expenditures. We have a payroll accrual, as well as some anticipated additional invoices that'll flow through the system to the tune of about $625,000. And we would anticipate that we'll come in under budgeted expenditures by $247,000. When we take all that together and we look at our accruals, we anticipate that our estimated revenues will be $34.8 million, and our expenditures will be about $34 million. So we anticipate a general fund surplus of about $800,000. And again, rounding, because these are estimates. And this slide shows the estimated versus the actual surpluses in the general fund, and you can note that historically we have been conservative with our estimates. And in fact, I'm estimating $800,000 surplus this year. That's what I estimated last year, and we came in with a $1.5 million surplus. So I've just looked at the past several years. Where were we? What was the cash basis surplus at June 30th compared to what we did actually? And I found that going back 5 years, on June 30th, 2014, at June 30th, the surplus was $2.7 million, but we ended the year after the accrual period with a surplus of $1.8 million. For June 30th, 2015, the cash basis surplus was 2.2, and we ended with 1.4 million actual. In 16, the cash basis surplus was 3.5 million. We actually ended up with 2.2 million. In 2017, the cash basis at June 30th was 1.7 million. We ended the year with 1.6 million actual. In 2018, the cash basis as of June 30th, the surplus was $306,000. And as I mentioned earlier, we ended the year with a 1.5 million actual. This year, in 19, the cash basis surplus is $37,000. So I'm estimating by the time we've accrued everything that we may have $800,000. So depending on how accurate my assumptions are, we will.
So you're estimating 800,000, but promising us 1.5 million.
Well, no, I'm not going to say that.
That's what I took.
But
Oh,
it would be a nice surprise. How about that? Yeah. And then this chart shows the revenue and expenditure history back to 2009 compared to the budget. And typically what we see here is we've always, I'll point out, the green line is the revenues, red line is expenditures, and the blue line is the operating budget. So we've never come below the budget for revenues. We typically have exceeded revenues, a couple exceptions there where we were just right on the line. And then with expenditures, we've typically had a large gap between what our operating budget was and coming in lower in the actual expenditures. And the exceptions to that were in 2009 at the height of the recession hitting. And then last year in 2018, we saw that really narrow significantly. And then it gets even narrower this year. And now move on to the Capital Improvement Fund. As of June 30th, our sales tax revenue was at $3.8 million and under budget by $568,000. However, since the sales collection lags by 2 months, we're anticipating an accrual of about $800,000, and that's dependent on we don't see any additional transfers out. And we mentioned earlier that in May, the transfers amounted to $167,000 for May and $241,000 for June. So in a 2-month time period, we've seen a total of $408,000 in transfers out. And I'll just clarify a little bit on our discussion earlier, where the Commissioner of Revenue's office does get a electronic report. It is not the easiest report to sort and work with. Typically, I will get a transfer notice from the jurisdiction requesting the transfer, and that notice will simply state the business name and the time period they're requesting. It doesn't have any dollars, and it doesn't indicate when the state might take the money back. So I think the last one, the ones that I'm seeing coming in May and June, I had that request back in February.
Just a quick question. I think I heard you say that jurisdictions request transfers?
Yes. So
how are they able to know?
Typically, they'll look at their and do an analysis of the information that they're getting from the state, the electronic reports, and they will then go back and match up. And they have a 3-year time period to do that. And I think oftentimes, due to time constraints, they try to make sure they at least do that audit on a 3-year cycle. Now, I think here lately they're trying to take a look and do that more regularly, because that has been a problem. And as Drew was stating, there have been a couple of businesses that will not correct. They report on a FIPS code, and I think some of the local corporations, their headquarters are reporting, so trying to get that message through and get it actually changed sometimes can be a challenge.
So would it be safe to assume that those jurisdictions that make the request based on analysis of money going somewhere else, they know if they've been overpaid?
They could, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I know you're not the Commissioner of Revenue, but I would think hopefully we're doing that same,
yes,
building that system so that we can do that same analysis. So
yes, and in my conversations with Ms. Overy, yes, she's, and has in fact resulted in some transfer ins. Unfortunately, they've been smaller than our transfer out, so.
Story of my life.
Okay, so then we have interest earnings, some stormwater management support that was collected, grant revenue, and then with our estimated sales tax, I'm estimating the revenue to come in the Capital Improvement Fund at about $6.2 million. Capital project expenditures at June 30th were $9.3 million. We had encumbrances of $197,000, and those encumbrances just simply expenditures that are already committed. for total expenditures of 9.5 and anticipate accruals of about $500,000. So the total expenses would be about $10 million. Now, that $10 million means that the expenditures exceeded revenues by about $3.9 million. Keep in mind, though, oftentimes when we have grant revenue coming in, it's on a reimbursement basis, so that's not a one-on-one match there.
It's also been our trend that we have a lot more project budgeted than we have staff to complete. So just because it's budgeted doesn't mean it will get expended, and we roll that money over into new fiscal years, as was the case with the sewer truck that you just recently approved.
And we'll work with the departments to determine what amounts need to roll forward. Just because it's left in the projects, not always, that doesn't mean it all needs to roll forward. And then this slide just lists some of the capital improvement projects that were worked on and funded during the year. A complete list is on your, can be seen in your monthly financial on page 5. And I'll just note for people in the audience that this financial report is available online by clicking on the e-meetings on the web page and then selecting the June 11th meeting, and when the agenda comes up, selecting the agenda packet.
July 11th.
July 11th.
Oh, yes. I've got June 30th on my brain now. You know, so I've got to figure out at this point which year I'm in.
Got your back, no worries.
Yeah. So now we take a look at the estimated general fund reserves. Start with the June 30th, 2018 fund balance of $44.6 million. That's been audited. Add to it the estimated revenues for 2019, deduct the expenditures, and I would expect a fund balance of $41.6 million. That is about $3.1 million less than the previous year. And if you look at the 3.9 reduction in the capital improvement fund, netted with the $800,000 surplus in the general fund, that equates to the $3.1 million. And then this slide breaks down the components of fund balance, with non-spendable being things that are that you can't spend, assets you can't spend. And in this case, that would be assets, land held for resale. The restricted of $13.5 million is the bond funds that we have available for a specific purpose. And in this case, it would be a new fire station and police station renovations. The assigned is the carryover projects that are still in the CIP plan. And then the unassigned amount of $12.9 million is 35% of our operating revenues in the general fund, and that is per the city's financial policies. And we look at the revenues now in the utility fund. At June 30th, on a cash basis, they had $6.7 million, anticipate another $1.2 million being accrued for total revenues of about $8 million. Expenses on a cash basis are at $5.2 million. The accruals will be about $1.4 million, with total expenses of $6.6 million. That gives revenue over expenses of $1.4 million. And although I did not break this down into operating and non-operating income, if I had, it would be very close to this number, maybe $17,000 more. And the difference is very similar. The results here are very similar to last year. The differences are the sewer revenue has decreased, and as a result, so has the sewer expense, because the funds that we collect on behalf of the Hampton Road Sanitation District, when we submit it to them, is recorded as an expense. Our interest earnings in the utility fund increased 65% over last year, and we have $160,000 revenue from the sale of timber at Waller Mill Park. And then the tourism fund, On a cash basis at June 30th, saw $4.9 million in revenue. I anticipate $510,000 to be accrued in revenue. That would be from the sales tax, the 1% sales tax, and the $2 lodging tax. The expenses at June 30th were about $2.9 million. We should have additional accruals of $160,000, bringing total expenses to $3.1 million, and we should end the year with about $2.3 million available for grants. And then our audit schedule, we will continue, as I mentioned earlier, to accrue revenues and expenses up until September 1st. The auditors will be here September 16th to conduct field work. The Finance and Audit Committee will meet with the auditors and staff on November 15th, and that'll be in preparation to turn in our report to the APA at the state. And then our comprehensive financial report will be presented to City Council at their December 12th meeting. And that concludes my report.
And so no questions. Thank you for taking the time. I'm glad everything seems to be right where we need it to be. I'm definitely looking forward to getting the sales tax submission from the state organized so that we can do our analysis so we're not stuck wondering.
We need to find, and we're working with the Commissioner of Revenue's office to try to find a way to go back and adjust our collections. We have to still show it like we show it for revenue purposes, but for revenue trend analysis, that would be very helpful.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for providing kind of an approximate snapshot of how we're doing in terms of our financial strength. I know there have been a lot of numbers that have been thrown around, but this is probably the most important thing we do. With the transfer of sales tax funds, do we have any concern with the auditors about that? Does that add any uncertainty that would give pause when they conduct their field work or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
I think any jurisdiction that has other localities close by, they have the same
Reflective
problem.
on the same thing.
It's a problem statewide.
You could see how it'd be even more of a tendency here because of the name Williamsburg. There are a lot of people who think they live in the city of Williamsburg who do not. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I know we've had some budgetary conversations and shifts based on the advent of our new tourism fund, SB 942 revenue. So can you refresh for me in terms of our maintenance of effort funds? Is that reflected in the general fund or tourism fund?
It's reflected in the tourism fund. We transfer $2.2 million from the general fund over to the tourism fund.
So when you're looking at this presentation for those who are still thinking about it, right?
Right, that was in the cash revenue, cash basis revenues as of June 30th.
Right, I just want to clarify that. Last question, on page 4 of your presentation, you're talking about estimating the 1.3 million in accruals, additional accruals. Give you a moment, page 4. Yeah, so is that on the conservative bar, a conservative estimate of yours, or is that kind of a higher, more optimistic outlook?
I think it's a more realistic estimate, quite frankly, yes.
Okay, cool. That's all. Thank you.
In terms of utilities enterprise, where do we report out, our reserves for capital assets on the utilities?
For when we do the utilities, it'll show us investment in capital assets on the balance sheet.
But in terms of projections for needs to fund future capital improvements on the utility side, how does that get documented and reported out?
You're talking about maintenance, new infrastructure or maintenance of infrastructure. It's really that's more of a capital improvement process, and it is part of the utility fund. And
We do that during the budget process.
We do that during the budget process.
We
It
do
is,
We do a capital plan for the
Well-
general fund and those departments, but we also do a capital plan for the utility
and,
division.
and in terms of what their budget was for 2019 and what has been expended to date, on the page 7 of your monthly financial report, we'll give a summary and also include what was carried over from the prior year. And then when we do our audit, our comprehensive annual financial report, the notes will speak to some of the transactions that occurred during the year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the presentation, and I don't have any other questions from what's already been asked.
No questions from me either. I'm just thrilled about your promise about the 1.5 million.
That's all I heard now.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. It was 30 minutes, but I took away my one nugget of information. That looks like it concludes our business today, which brings us to open forum. Anybody who would like to address council on any matter is welcome to come forward. If you would please offer your name and address and keep your remarks to 5 minutes or less, we would appreciate that. Seeing no one, we'll close the open forum, and I believe we have at least one item for closed session.
At least one, but probably more. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personal matter pursuant to subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, two legal matters per subparagraph 8 for the purpose of consultation with specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning the proposed contract and code enforcement action, and one matter per subparagraph 5 regarding the prospective business, industry, or expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the city.
What did that mean?
I don't know.
That's really long. Yeah, wow.
Do I have a second?
There was no
Second
period in
that.
there.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Council will reconvene after a short recess.